The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another edition of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, the #1 internet radio, 100% listener supported, where freedom of speech is king. And if you want to watch the replay for today's radio podcast, we always put it up on our YouTube channel, Magnetic Reversal News, around 8 p.m. the same evening. That would be Saturday night. Now, we are in Mountain Time, so it's noon Mountain Time here for the show. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all those that are watching out there. The title of today's show, and I'm sure you're wondering what it is in fact World in Peril. Yes. We're going to be talking about this book by Ken White, which came out in 1992, and it is subtitled The Origin, Mission, and Scientific Findings of the 46th 72nd Reconnaissance Squadron. Now, I was able to pick up this copy of the book from an antique store right when it became popular, and I was happy to find out that it is a special edition. First of all, it is signed by Ken White with a little note, but it also comes with the errata card, the original documentation. It comes with an original cover, and it comes with a picture of Ken White signed. So this was a steal. I got it for $50, and then when I checked eBay, you can't get this book for less than around $1,000 right now. So lucky to grab a copy of that, and we're going to be reading from this today. We're going to be talking specifically. There are 3 chapters in here which people are using to claim that a catastrophe is coming to the Earth, the likes of which no one has ever seen. And the only problem with that, and we're going to get into it and break it down. So we're going to start with chapter 29, which is called Polar Wander. And what I'm going to do is read it paragraph by paragraph. And when there's an issue that comes up about geology, we're going to discuss it. Now, the problem with people with these catastrophe theories on the internet today is that they're scaring hundreds of thousands of people to death. People that don't have the ability to understand the science, and they are simply following along with the narrative. And that is not really good for humanity. It might be good for the bottom line of the YouTubers, but the whole purpose of the Oppenheimer Ranch project is to unveil the lies. And we do that by educating the public. Now, the problem with using Ken White's book and other books like books by Chan Thomas or Charles Hapgood is that they're old. They're all decades old, 3 to 5 decades old. And at the same time, the science of geology is only in its infancy. It's been around for about a century. That's 100 years. And in the last 100 years, we barely know anything. The plate tectonic theory is just a few decades old and may not be true. As more evidence is revealed and as the science gets greater and greater and there's more information, hypotheses change and ideas change. And that's why using these antiquated books to predict some catastrophe in the future is almost ridiculous. When I read through them now, after all the knowledge I've gained in the last decade of researching these topics, it's quite clear that what they were writing back then may have been the truth. But if you interpret these books with modern eyes, like I've done, and Leah, who is not with us today, unfortunately, she couldn't join us. So that's why I'm doing this geologic analysis of some of the literature, is to help guide you through the gobbledygook, the nonsense. And most of it's nonsense, because lots of the things they discovered 50 years ago, and in this case, we're going to be talking about Project Nanook. Now, the book World in Peril by Ken White is a biographical piece, basically, about his father, Major Maynard E. White. He was the commander of the 46th 72nd Recon Squad and Project Nanook. Now, this took place from June of 1946 to August of 1948, just a little over 2 years. And we didn't know anything about geology, so that the geology they discussed during Project Nanook is antiquated and it's wrong. So when they went up there and they found tropical plants, we now know that the tropical plants that they found were fossils that are hundreds of millions of years old, a time when the Arctic wasn't in the Arctic. And so the conclusions they come to are completely ridiculous and have nothing to do with reality today with the level of geologic knowledge we know. Anyone using these books to claim that what they're saying is correct simply doesn't know anything about the most basic geologic principles of today. They do understand what the book says, and they just roll with it. The problem is what's in the book is old and incorrect. It's not true. The Arctic wasn't recently tropical because the tropical fossils that they found up there are hundreds of millions of years old. There's no evidence that the Arctic has been anywhere but the Arctic for millions of years, for the entire ice age, in fact, that we are still in, by the way. So let's get on with the program, shall we? And we're going to start by sharing the screen. Hopefully you can see the screen. This is the book, World in Peril, and luckily we can provide you with the whole 291-page manuscript in PDF form so that you don't have to spend $1,000. And it will be linked below the video on Magnetic Reversal News this evening. So let's dive into World in Peril. But before we do that, I'll give you a little bit of background on what the book is about. I told you it's about the reconnaissance missions from 1946 to 48 of Major Maynard E. White, and the project was called Project Nanook. So this is what his son, Ken White, says. It is with great professional respect and the highest personal regard that I salute the officers and men of this extraordinary organization for their outstanding work. Without exception, all members of the 46th 72nd Squadron may well take pride in the accomplishments of the unit and in the part that each member played in writing a new and important chapter in the annals of aviation history. Throughout my life, I've heard my father tell stories about the 46th 72nd Recon Squadron, which took place on the Alaskan frontier where I was born in the late 40s. To me, there was something almost legendary about these exploits. From carrying out reconnaissance missions over the unknown Arctic to finding 3 magnetic North Poles to hunts for 10-foot-tall Kodiak bears, I have always felt that these accounts should be put in writing. But it wasn't until my own retirement from the Air Force that the opportunity presented itself. And so the book was published in 1992, and thus begins chapter 29. And the title of the chapter is Polar Wander. And this chapter was authored by Frank N. McGill, which is interesting because I thought it was authored by Ken White and the accounts his father gave him. So apparently there's another author on this particular chapter. Very suspicious. Okay. The type of earth science we're going to be talking about in this chapter is geophysics. More specifically, the field of study was geomagnetism and paleomagnetism. And I'm reading the chapter, and I'm going to interject paragraph by paragraph if need be. Evidence from several of the earth sciences clearly demonstrates that the Earth's magnetic and geographic poles have been located at widely separate places relative to its surface during the planet's geologic history. Now, that's a loaded question, and it is true, but what we know about plate tectonics is that the continents move around. So given enough time in geologic time, hundreds of millions of years, a continent is going to be on the other side of the planet, perhaps, in that length of time because things are moving around. The crust is slipping around on the asthenosphere, essentially. So, again, this book is based on old geology. So, shortly before World War II, geophysicists discovered a method of determining the location of rocks on the Earth's surface at the time they were formed. And this is all relative to the North Magnetic Pole. Thus began the study of paleomagnetism. Paleomagnetic studies quickly yielded very puzzling, yes, and often contradictory results. The new science produced evidence that the North Magnetic Pole has changed its location by thousands, even tens of thousands of miles, hundreds of times in Earth's geologic history. Now, since Earth scientists are generally agreed that the North Magnetic Pole has always corresponded closely with the North Geographic Pole, or rotational pole, this evidence seemed to indicate that the Earth's axis of rotation must have changed, a highly unlikely occurrence. Yes, it is highly unlikely because it would be devastating to all life on Earth. And life on Earth has been doing just fine for hundreds of millions of years. So there's that. Plus, we now have the plate tectonic theory, which says that in hundreds of millions of years, all of the continents can move around complete circles on the Earth, perhaps. So the magnetic pole may wander, but the geographic pole is stationary. Now, as the paleomagnetic evidence for different locations of the poles in the past accumulated through measurements of rock formations from around the world, more and more Earth scientists began to accept the theory of continental drift. This theory offered an explanation of the paleomagnetic evidence without the necessity of postulating that the Earth's axis of rotation had changed. So we don't need the rotational pole of Earth to change because if you're looking at this diagram, we have mid-ocean ridges, which are like conveyor belts producing ocean crust and pushing continents. That is the basic idea. Now, Alfred Wegener, early in the 20th century, had drawn attention to the theory that continents moved in relation to one another. Most geologists initially greeted his theories with derision, but many others agreed with him, causing an often bitter controversy in the earth sciences that lasted half a century. The ever-growing body of paleomagnetic evidence could be explained by postulating that the surface area of the Earth moves in relationship to the planet's axis of rotation. This explanation proved to be more acceptable to geologists than the idea that the axis of rotation had changed. So right here, even in the young heyday of the geological sciences, we can see that as more evidence comes out of plate tectonics and paleomagnetism, that it's the crust that's moving and it's not the rotational pole. So, but what about the magnetic poles? That's interesting. Now, with the growing acceptance of the theory of continental drift in the 1940s, and let's get to that picture, geologists began trying to explain the mechanism that causes this. They postulated that the Earth has a stable and very dense core overlain by an area called the asthenosphere, which is made up of rock rendered plastic by heat and pressure. Floating on the asthenosphere is the Earth's outer crust, or the lithosphere. Dislocations within the Earth caused by the action of heat and pressure result in the movement of the lithosphere on top of the asthenosphere. The initial attempts to explain continental drift have been considerably revised and refined into the modern theory of plate tectonics and ocean bed spreading. But the basic premise remains the same. The surface area of the Earth move in relationship to its core and its axis to rotation. The result of the movement of the Earth's lithosphere is that the surface area located at the axis of rotation does not remain the same over long periods of time. The shifting accounts for the apparent wandering of the poles, as well as for several other puzzling aspects of Earth's geologic history. Now, what does that mean? It means that if Eurasia was once here and it moves to the south, it's going to appear as if the rotational pole has moved. But if, in fact, Eurasia is just a plate sliding on the asthenosphere, then the rotational pole does not have to move, just the crust. Now, what I find confusing about this book is that they often muddy the waters by saying geographic or rotational pole. See, many people don't understand that there are multiple poles on Earth. The most important pole that doesn't change is the pole which we rotate on. That's the geographic pole. Now, if that remains constant and plate tectonics is true, then the plates can slide anywhere and make it appear as if the rotational pole has changed. One of the arguments is that Antarctica was once ice-free. And we're going to get to that in much more detail at the end of the podcast when I reveal to you that the Piri Reis map is simply a map of South America and not ice-free Antarctica, because the geology is very solid on the ice on Antarctica. The ice on Antarctica has been there for about 30 million years, which is quite a bit of time. And it, in fact, has not been recently ice-free at all. But if we go back 200 million years, before Antarctica was in the South Pole, it was slightly north of there and in a warmer area. So it had been ice-free for quite some time. We'll get into more of the details of the exactitude of Antarctica in the second half of the show. Let's get on with this chapter. Shrinking evidence that the surface areas of the Earth have moved enormous distances during geologic history. Striking evidence that the surface area of Earth has moved enormous distances during geologic history relative to its axis of rotation comes from the study of glaciers. Observations from around the globe show that almost all the land areas of the Earth have been glaciated at some time in the past. This includes parts of Africa, India, and South America presently located near the equator. Without postulating either a substantial shifting of the Earth's surface relative to its axis of rotation or a change of that axis, equatorial glaciation is inexplicable. Well, no, it isn't, because we just accepted the theory of plate tectonics. And if the crust slides around the Earth, then all of these continents could have once been in the North or South Pole, where it's very cold. If global temperatures drop to levels sufficient to glaciate even the equator at some point in the past, all life on Earth would have been destroyed. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. Certainly all land plants would be crushed, but during ice ages, there are always interlayers and pockets of no ice. Even on Antarctica, that's been covered in ice for 30 million years, there are hundreds of square miles that are ice-free. Because if ice is not building in some areas, it can evaporate and go away. So a lot of the assumptions in this book are just not correct. They're just bad assumptions. Like if there was glaciation, everything would be destroyed. I really don't believe that. Shifting of the Earth's surface relative to its axis of rotation is almost certainly a major cause of the ice ages. So what this is saying is that shifting of the Earth's surface is a major cause of ice ages. Now, the problem with that is that what they're saying is if you're in North America and there's an ice age, it's because North America is sliding up into the Arctic. And now we don't have an ice age anymore because North America has slid away south of the Arctic. That's what they're saying there. Now, the problem with that idea is if we look at the GISP-2, and that is the Greenland ice sheet, what we're going to see, oh, that is not what we want there. What we're going to see is a 100,000-year cycle. And there is no way that plate tectonics can move that quickly. And I'm not really getting a good, let's look at Epica. Okay, we'll pull that up after the break, and I'll make my point then. So there's a couple of problems before we get into the break here with this model and a lot of the stuff they're saying in this book. And it's logical. So just take a look, if you can, at home of Pangea. Pull it up on your phone. Now, what they're claiming is that 200 to 300 million years ago, there was a giant continent called Pangea on one side of the Earth. Now, if you just think about that logically, if you put all the weight of the crust on one side of the Earth, that's going to create some issues with wobbling. It will simply create a situation where the Earth maybe wobbles out of its orbit. And that means we wouldn't be here anymore and everything would die. And clearly, Earth has been in the Goldilocks zone for hundreds of millions of years because we've had life on Earth for that period of time. So what was going on in Pangea? There was an ocean 2/3 of the Earth that was 11,000 miles across. It just doesn't make sense. And if you dive into the Earth's isochron maps, these are maps that show the age of the ocean floor. What you're going to find is that the oldest ocean is only about 200 million years old. So if the oldest ocean is only 200 million years old, then what they're claiming is that this ancient ocean called the Tethys Ocean is all now missing. Yeah, they're claiming that the ocean plate from the Tethys Ocean is completely gone, subducted under all of the continents in just 200 million years. This gigantic Tethys Ocean, which is 2/3 of the planet, is missing. There is not a single piece of it left anywhere on Earth. Does that make sense? Does that make any sense at all to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me, and it's not logical. What's logical is if you take all the mid-ocean ridges and you reverse them, you don't get Pangea, you get a smaller Earth, where the entire Earth is crust and there are no oceans. This is something that's not in textbooks until recently. And it's called the expanding Earth hypothesis. And it very may well be the right answer. But there just aren't enough scientists working on this right now. But what we do know, and the science that has been done, is pretty simple. That the ocean floor on all of the Earth is all 200 million years old or younger. And if the Tethys Ocean actually existed, there would be some evidence of it still left because 200 million years is very recent geologically. And the probability of erasing the entire Tethys Ocean is essentially zero. And we'll be right back after the break.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. There was blood on the wire. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West. There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons. Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
There have been imaginative science fiction writers for generations.
Be evasive.
But that doesn't mean that they're telling the truth as opposed to fiction.
I'm aware of some archaeologists that have uncovered large bones indicating giants in Virginia. Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, indicating that there were giants before the Nephilim.
And sons of God, plural. They weren't talking about Jesus coming down and
No, that's right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm Steve Crawford. Join me every Thursday night in Studio A at 6 p.m. Eastern for Factor Theory Live. Find us on www.revolution.radio. Great guests and great stories. What do you believe?
Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Yeah. So we're back, and we left you at the break with a video from Neil Adams of the expanding Earth hypothesis that's decades old. And it's so amazing, and that no geologists are picking up on it. Very few people are rolling with the hypothesis that best explains the isochron data. So what's with that? That's what I want to know. What is with that? So here's the video. We're going to link below everything we talk about today. So if you want to go get the links to all the things we're discussing, you're going to need to go over to Magnetic Reversal News on YouTube and watch the podcast, because below it will be all the links. Now, it's been about 50 years since we started to understand that the magnetic field on Earth shifts and flips. The last time it flipped is a long time ago. Just about 750,000 years ago was the last pole flip, where the magnetic pole goes from north to south and flips. South becomes north and north becomes south. Very similar to the sun. Now, the sun is a little more regular. Every 22 years, we have a full magnetic reversal of the sun. Half of that, when north turns to south, is called the solar cycle. 2 solar cycles is a full solar polar reversal of the magnetic field of the sun. The same thing happens on Earth, but not regularly. If you just look at this graph of the last 140 million years, you can see there have been lots of geomagnetic reversals, but sometimes for tens of millions of years, the magnetism of our planet remains constant, and sometimes it shifts rapidly. And we still have no explanation for why this is happening. Pretty interesting. Most of the expansion of the oceans started about 200 million years ago. And so we only have this type of data going back that far. That's even more interesting, because we're missing the entire Tethys Ocean. The Tethys Ocean crust, the ocean crust from the Tethys Ocean, is not anywhere on Earth today, which makes the theory of plate tectonics or continental drift hard to swallow at this point. What do you guys think? There should definitely be some Tethys Ocean crust left on Earth if the expansion that we're talking about happened just in about 200 million years. We know this is true because of the isochron data showing the oldest ocean floor is just about 200 million years old. Here on the edge of the Atlantic, when Africa began pulling away from North America, that was 200 million years ago. And it started as a river. Then it became a thin, long lake. And then it took millions of years for it to become an ocean. Same thing happening in the Pacific. Same thing happening in the Indian Ocean. None of it is older than 200 million years old. Why is that? Why is there no Tethys Ocean remnants anywhere? Well, they're saying it's all been subducted underneath of the crust. Now, we have crust that's billions of years old still on Earth. Let that sink in. Let's get back to the book here and pick up where we left off. Shifting of the Earth's surface relative to the axis of rotation is almost certainly a major cause of the so-called ice ages. Okay, they're saying that plate tectonics causes ice ages. Now, I pulled up the data here. This is the last 420,000 years. And you can see that there is a 100,000 year cycle that's happening, like clockwork. Boom. Where the temperature rises and falls over 12 degrees C again and again and again and again. And this is the Ice Age. And simply by looking at this graph, you can see that these are not being caused by plate tectonics. There are no plates that are sliding up into the Arctic and back down every 100,000 years. That is lunacy. So the first sentence of this paragraph is lunacy. Shifting of the Earth's surface is not the cause of the ice ages. So let's read their incorrect statement and continue with the paragraph. Shifting of the Earth's surface relative to its axis of rotation is almost certainly a major cause of the so-called ice ages, the origin of which have puzzled glaciologists since the beginning of that science. Previous explanation of ice ages include global drops in temperature, the passage of the Earth through exceptionally cold regions in space, or through areas containing space dust that block out a significant amount of the sun's radiation, and unexplained fluctuations in the amount of radiation generated by the sun. I think they nailed it there. The most logical answer using Occam's razor on why these cycles happen is because the sun goes through cold and warm phases, or maximums and minimums at a scale of 100,000 years. Like clockwork, we know that the one thing in our solar system that changes like clockwork is the sun. That's the only object that acts that way. The sun changes its magnetic field like clockwork. Every 11 years, it flips halfway. Every 22 years, it does a full flip. And maybe every 100,000 years, it has a larger cycle going on, up and down. And maybe after these major spikes, the cooling is a result of the warming. So if you warm too rapidly and the sun heats up the Earth too quickly, there may be a tipping point on Earth where we have to go into a glacial period. Because let's say something happens with ocean currents. So I believe that the sun is the culprit here, creating ice ages. The paragraph goes on to say, are all of these ideas unsatisfactory? No, because we just told you why the sun is a great candidate. The sun has regular cycles. It's been doing it since we've been observing it. And we haven't been observing the sun for 100,000 years yet to know if there in fact is a larger cycle on the sun. But people like Valentina Zarkova and others have used some calculus to prove that there are other larger cycles, 200 year, 1,000 year, and greater. And these are the grand solar minimum cycles and bond cycles that we're looking at here. Large scale changes in the output of our sun are causing the fluctuations here on Earth. It's too regular to be anything else. Now, more importantly, these cycles haven't ended. So it means that we're still in an ice age. The temperature is about to rapidly drop 10 degrees C, like every time it spikes. It's just a matter of time. And we're talking about global warming 1 degree, which won't even show up on this map. I wish we taught everyone the ice core data at a very young age. We could actually get some good scientists coming out with some new good ideas. The book continues by saying it seems much more likely that areas of the Earth that were glaciated in the past, such as Northern Europe and North Africa, and as far south as present-day New Jersey, were located much closer to one or the other of the poles at the time they were covered in ice? Well, this shows you that they don't understand time frames. Because the last time the places in northern New Jersey was glaciated was just 13,000 years ago. That's extremely recent. That's right here. At the coldest point on the map or on the graph here. So when it was 12 degrees C colder in the northern hemisphere, of course there was ice, giant ice caps. This book is just chock full of bad science. That's it. The same with Chan Thomas's book, the same with the Hapgood book, the same with all the cockamamie ideas that the Earth's rotational axis tilts 90 degrees for half a day and then goes right back and all the animals live. It's just a fairy tale. Just like the fairy tale here that in this book, it's saying that these continents must have been nearer to the North Pole. That's why they had ice. So we need to have continental drift happen in 13,000 years to put North America up in the Arctic. The part that we live in, continental US, needs to be up near the Arctic. That's just, there is no evidence that that's true. The evidence is that that's not true. Man, we're not even halfway through this chapter and it's just completely filled with bad information, this book. The study of paleoclimatology, that's my specialty, by the way, has also produced evidence supporting the proposition of the shifting of Earth's crust relative to its axis of rotation. So yeah, paleogeographic studies that I've done, which cover hundreds of millions of years, can prove that some of the continental plates were once near the South Pole or nearer the North Pole than they are today. But that's hundreds of millions of years ago, not 14,000 years ago when we had ice in New Jersey. So, wow. So what we can prove is a few things right here, that plate tectonics is very slow if it's truly happening, and that this entire book is based on the crust rapidly shifting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that creates ice ages at a regular period of 100,000 years. That's a crazy idea. And the fact that the study of paleoclimatology has produced enough evidence to show that the Earth's crust slowly shifts and can explain why all the continents have been glaciated within the last several 100 million years. No need for rapid flipping or shifting of crust. Paleoclimatologists study the climate of past ages on the various parts of the Earth's surface. They have found that Antarctica once supported rich varieties of plant and animal life, many of which could have lived in the temperate and even subtropical climates. Explorations of the far north regions of Canada, Alaska, and Siberia have revealed that those areas also supported multitudes of animals and luxurious forests in the past. Now here's where it gets funny. They're talking about two completely different things. The evidence in Antarctica that it was once warm and lush is hundreds of millions of years old. Which means that Antarctica could have moved into the South Pole position over hundreds of millions of years, which in fact it has. The icing of the Antarctica began in the late Paleocene or Middle Eocene, between 60 and 45 million years ago. So that's probably when it was near the South Pole. I don't know if you know this, but the South Pole is freezing. It almost never gets above zero. So if you have a continent there, it's going to build ice continuously. And in this case, for 60 million years, Antarctica has been building ice. The evidence up in Canada and the Arctic that it was warm is just a few thousand years old. Which means a few thousand years ago, it was much warmer on the planet. This is quite interesting. The ice gain on Antarctica escalated during the Eocene-Oligocene extinction event 34 million years ago, when CO2 levels were 760 parts per million. It's almost double of what they are today, and that caused cooling or ice build. And then carbon dioxide decreased to 600 parts per million. And they're saying that was the primary agent for forcing the Antarctic glaciation. It's like reverse global warming. Only 600 parts per million is still 50% higher than it is today. And they're claiming that the drop in carbon dioxide, a trace gas, from 760 to 600 caused the glaciation of Antarctica. This is absolutely ridiculous. And let's get on to some more of the ridiculous Antarctica data before we run out of time. I'm sure you all heard of the Piri Reis map. Let's see what they say here. The reality and myth of the Piri Reis map of 1513. What is the map? Well, the Piri Reis map was compiled in 1513. It's one of the oldest post-Columbian world maps in existence. It's drawn on a gazelle skin. That's amazing. And it was created by an Ottoman Turkish admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. The map is extremely detailed for its time, and many people think it shows Antarctica ice-free. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of shows and podcasts claiming this to be true. That's because the majority of quote-unquote independent researchers have no background in research. They didn't study it at university. And so their idea of research is putting something in the Google bar and clicking the first link and seeing what it says. Where in fact, it's taken me decades in academia and my personal learning and field work to even come close to understanding any of this information. There are even paranormal interpretations of what's going on. When the reality is if you just get a map of South America, here's South America, you can connect all of the points on the Piri Reis map. Here is the tip of Brazil, and so on and so forth. There's the Cape. So the Piri Reis map is a little askewed. It's not as good as they thought it was. And that's probably because as they got closer and closer to the South Magnetic Pole, it might have skewed their map because they didn't understand what was going on. This is an early map, albeit exceptionally good. Look at this peninsula exactly mapped like it is. And even the animals that they depict being at these locations are at these locations in South America. So no, Antarctica was not ice-free recently, and, ancient aliens came down and glaciated it and hid their secret alien bunkers. Probably not. Probably not. And then that brings us to these isochron maps, because we're not going to finish the chapter. But what we did learn by diving into this book is quite obvious, I think. That even the most recent account, the one called World in Peril, that is trying to claim that there's some kind of a pole flip, the rotational pole flips, or the crust comes loose, like Hapgood or Chan Thomas, or the suspicious one, they don't have any background in science. They don't have any background in geology. They don't have a deep understanding of geology that is modern, today's understanding. And they're simply reading and believing bad science from these authors. Where if I sat down any geologist and went over the topics that we just discussed, they would be in 100% agreement that Antarctica has been covered in ice for 60 million years, and that the ocean floor is only 200 million years old, and it's unexplainable unless the Earth was once smaller. Now, the amazing thing is that if it only took 200 million years to create all of the oceans that we have, that the Earth was maybe half the size, if expanding Earth is correct, than it is now. That would account for a lot of things. That would allow us to have dinosaurs, strange megafauna, 300-foot ferns. If the Earth is that much smaller, where's the water from all the oceans? It's in the atmosphere, in my opinion. The atmosphere would be huge and contain massive amounts of water until it could precipitate down into the oceans as the Earth grows. As the Earth grows, it splits apart. The atmosphere is getting thinner. The weather is getting intense. And maybe there are some reactions at the asthenosphere or the core, which is bringing out that ocean of water at the center of the Earth onto the surface. These are all new discoveries. We recently found that there is more water in the Earth than we know of on the Earth. Probably twice as much water in the Earth than in all the oceans and lakes and rivers and weather systems. So there's plenty of water. And the plate tectonic theory just doesn't hold water. Neither do any of these catastrophe theories. If plate tectonics was true and Pangea was on one side of the Earth, it would cause us to wobble out of our orbit. We would no longer be here. So there is a problem with Pangea. Unless the aliens put a gigantic lead weight on the other side of the Earth to save us, this idea is probably not true. And there is some advanced work going on now on the expanding Earth hypothesis. And this is being done by Mario Buildreps, I believe, because he has some compelling evidence to show that in a million years, the North Magnetic Pole has wandered quite a considerable distance. And maybe it does it in short jerks, where we have accelerated expansion, not crustal slip. The Earth grows, and because it grows differentially, it's going to appear as if the rotational pole is changing, because what's actually happening is that the plates are moving as the Earth expands. And we're well aware of geomagnetic jerks and what they can do. A geomagnetic jerk in 1859 changed the direction of the geomagnetic pole, and it began rapidly moving across the surface. In fact, Earth's magnetic field is notoriously inconstant. The North Pole itself has been wandering across the Arctic for centuries. Like I said, it's currently racing from northern Canada towards Siberia. Same thing happening with the South Geopole. It's nowhere near the southern rotation pole, hundreds of miles away, and it has just left the Antarctic continent and it's headed towards Indonesia. These unpredictable paths have prompted hurried updates to the world magnetic model. Usually updated every 5 years, it had to be updated annually now, which means that the geopoles are rapidly shifting. And yes, we are in the next geomagnetic excursion. I do have an amazing graph here of all the geomagnetic excursions in the last 2 million years. Look at how many there are. They happen all the time. Different intensities. And you can see the last geomagnetic pole flip was way back here. But in that 740,000 years, we had dozens of magnetic excursions where the field strength drops down towards zero. The further down you go, the worse off it is for things on Earth. This one right here, which looks like nothing, took out Neanderthals and many other megafauna. just around 41,000 years ago. And we are now entering the next geomagnetic excursion, and the field intensity is dropping. What does that mean for you and I? It means a few things. This happens all the time. And we are headed into the next ice age. Be safe. Love you. We'll see you next week.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.